Bablyon is brought to us by Damien Chazelle, starring Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, Diego Calva, Gene Smart, Lucas Haas, Tobey Maguire, an epic period piece that's set in the 1920s and 30s, chronicling the events of the early days of Hollywood as they transition from silent films to talkies, which now we know is films with sound. The story mostly centers on Diego Calva's character Manny and his bond with Nellie, played by Margot Robbie, along with other people like Jack, played by Brad Pitt, who are both stars in the early days of Hollywood, and how they navigate through the craziness of the film industry. Damien Chazelle, I think, is a filmmaker that we should all be paying attention to, because ever since Whiplash, anytime that he puts out something, most people, if not everybody, are going to go see it, just to see what he has to say. Whiplash was incredible. La La Land, didn't love it. But I think underneath the surface, it had somewhat of a powerful message to it, especially with the ending. First Man, where it talks about Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, that's the kind of movie where you go to experience the mission towards the moon. Outside of all that, I found the characters very hard to connect with. Now we get to Bablyon, which has a slew of people and a bunch of storylines all trying to converge at once, and some will get a lot of attention and others won't. I guess if I have to talk about this movie, I have to go into certain details about it, so mild spoiler warning. The opening scene, which lasts about 40 minutes until the title card finally shows up, is absolute pure insanity. Among the first things that we see is an elephant taking a dump on somebody. Something like that tells its audience that the entire movie is going to be more or less like that, which shows in the party scene where we see a bunch of people without their clothes on and having all kinds of sexual adventures. This is Hollywood, so you kind of expect stuff like that to happen. When famous people have certain connections with others, it's gonna lead them to certain places that normal people would never want to go to. Considering the film is rated R, that's not really surprising. At one point I actually read that they considered using an X rating. I'm actually really glad that they didn't do that because, and I think if the box office returns are any indication, I don't know for sure, but I could easily see this film not being financially successful because of the content. I kind of figured that this movie was going to be a party movie, kind of like Wolf of Wall Street, which many people have pointed out comparisons to. But at the heart of the movie, it's really about these three main characters, Manny, Nellie, and Jack, and how they find their way to make an impact on the world by taking part in the film industry. Certain scenes where Nellie takes part in a silent film where she has to do multiple take after another, trying to convey a certain type of emotion, using all of her pain and baggage to get that emotion out, which I think a lot of actors and actresses tend to do that stuff. You draw from what you remember and what you know in order to get the right emotion that you need in a certain scene. I like seeing stuff like that where we see behind the scenes stuff and shows you just how movies are made. It's really fascinating when you think about it. Seeing all the hard work that goes into something like that, especially now having seen this, it tells you that movies are very hard to make. It's easy for YouTube channels like Screen Junkies or CinemaSins to rip something apart saying, "Look at this moment, that's stupid, this movie sucks." Or "Why would they say that or act like this way? That doesn't make sense." I get it's all in good fun, but it should be a reminder that filmmaking isn't exactly a walk in the park. I've never taken part in a filmmaking production. I have a hard enough time trying to make simple videos like this. But it should be a reminder that this isn't exactly an easy job to do. Eventually, Nellie is able to find her way to the top of stardom, while Jack starts to fall off the stardom once it transitions into the talkies, since he's known for silent films. And when Nellie takes part in her first production where it requires her to talk into the microphone, that scene was, I guess, meant to be very funny, but it was also very tense too, where everybody threatens each other with violence. Margot Robbie actually threatens the sound guy who keeps being very anal about certain sounds that are taking place inside the studio. And the producer threatens to do certain things to people if one of them yells cut. At that point, the tension was through the stratosphere. Even one of the production people that's inside this one booth that gets really hot inside ends up dying of a heart attack from a heat stroke. But then it moves on into the next crazy scene like it was nothing. There's plenty of positives about this movie, but if there's one consistent thing, you're not going to sit there bored out of your mind. You will definitely be hooked into it. It's very erratic, very chaotic, and it throws a lot of stuff at you to make sure that you're paying attention. But it's also really hard to keep track of too, because there's so many things happening at once, and it does jump quite a lot as far as passage of time. Some of my favorite moments are when we see the productions of certain scenes. Like there's one scene with a choir of people singing the song Singing in the Rain, using water for rain effect, and they got all this weird makeup on and the rain suits. Brad Pitt is a part of the group with his one ex-girlfriend that's threatening him from afar. Or a certain moment where Gene Smart's character has a conversation with Brad Pitt talking about how his time would eventually come to an end, but he'll always be remembered in history forever, when several decades from now, people will look at your movies and feel connected with you. In a way, you'll live on for eternity. It's a very profound statement. It reminds me of something that Ed Harris said in that one National Treasure movie he was in, Man's Only Got One Lifetime, but history can remember you forever. If you were to place yourself into a film or a television show, or in these days a video game, which are becoming just as legitimate as film, in a way, you actually get to live forever. That's another thing I could say about this movie, that amidst all of this craziness that it throws at you, it does at the very least try to convey some kind of message about filmmaking and how powerful that type of art can have on an audience. I do appreciate the attempt, but I think sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle of all the stuff that it's throwing around. I know that Hollywood was like that in a lot of ways back then, and I'm more than certain that it's not that different from today, but there were some times that I thought it was just too much. Like the scene involving Tobey Maguire's character, James McKay, when he takes Manny and his one companion, I believe it's the sound guy, to get an idea for a movie. You see a muscle guy eating rats when they're alive. At that point, I literally started to gag and I thought I was gonna vomit. I'm not kidding. I literally got sick to my stomach. There's a lot of other stuff that I'm not talking about that I don't really feel the need to go into at the moment, like a certain scene with a rattlesnake, and you've heard it in the trailers. Who wants to see my dad fight a snake? But moments like that, I can't help but wonder, are you doing this for a reason, or is this just supposed to be shock value? It's his art, he can do whatever art he wants, and that's totally fine. I'm not against that at all. But it almost kind of reminds me of Game of Thrones in one specific way. I've only watched the first season and half of season 2 of Game of Thrones. When you attempt some stuff that is very taboo or extreme in some ways, or things that most people would never do, it depends on who you are as a person, and everybody has a different type of tolerance level. I like to think for the most part I can let things roll off my back very easily, but in the case of this movie, especially with the rats, I said out loud, okay, that's too much. I don't need that. And some of the people in here do really, really questionable and crazily reprehensible things. Margot Robbie's character, Nellie, gets involved in gambling, and the types of people that she gets connected with. Yeah, inevitably, when you are rising up into stardom like that, and if you're very impressionable and easily swayed, odds are you're gonna get caught up in something bad. But Margot Robbie's character is a promising young actress who rises to stardom in Hollywood. This is probably the best work I've seen her do. She's really good at bearing all this pain that she's got welling up inside of her by letting this free and wild spirit come out of her. Like when she says, "Who wants to see my dad fight a snake?" When she does lines on the table with her friend Manny, using ice for certain parts of her body, when she lies about it to the face of the director and the other actors on set. The movie requires her to do a lot of bizarre stuff. Major props to her for being able to do that stuff, because I would imagine that when most people read that on paper, they go, yeah, no, not doing that. Brad Pitt in this movie is Brad Pitt. Not anything that we haven't seen from him before, but I will watch that movie in anything that he's in. I feel like if he had a different actor there, it probably wouldn't have been that much different. I think in the case of Brad Pitt, it almost felt like maybe it could have been for anybody else to play that part. Then again, I think Brad Pitt was the right choice for that. Like with Margot Robbie, he has a really good way of burying a world of pain underneath him, but you could clearly tell that it's affecting him. As he's transitioning into the talkies, he's clearly not really good at reading dialogue or acting out dialogue, as opposed to doing the silent stuff where he just conveys it through looks. Like when he goes to the movie theater and sees one of his talkies being played in front of a crowd and everybody's laughing at his line delivery. It's kind of crushing, actually. Diego Calva's character is basically the audience character, the most grounded and most human of all of them. In a movie like this, you need somebody like that who seems like a normal person. Not to copy off of Red Letter Media's video on the Phantom Menace or anything, but it's true. Whenever the movie cuts back to him, it feels more like, okay, we're back to reality now. You get lost in the craziness and the zaniness of Hollywood. You need somebody who's at least normal. Besides the one character, Sidney Palmer, who doesn't really get that much attention. Plays a trumpet in all the movies that he stars in, and at one point he's forced to put on black charcoal in order to affect the lighting of the camera. Otherwise the production's gonna shut down. And after that he decides that he doesn't want to take part in any films anymore because of that. I do wish that he had more to do, because I think that if we got more time with him, it would have been very interesting. The times of segregation and Jim Crow laws back then, and how Hollywood was dealing with the ramifications of that back in the day, would have been kind of fascinating to see that. Now when it comes to Tobey Maguire, you guys all know, if you've been watching my channel for a long time, that Tobey Maguire is my all-time favorite actor. Any movie that he's in, I will go see it. no question. No matter how great it is or how so-so or just really bad the film is, which honestly, in my opinion, all the movies I've seen him do, I don't think any of them are really bad. At the very least, maybe not that good, but even so, I still think he gives it his all every time. A lot of reports came out several months ago that he was supposed to be playing Charlie Chaplin. Just the idea of that made me really excited. But then they came out and said, no, he's actually a guy named James McKay. Alright. But it turns out he's a crime boss who Nellie owes a lot of money to, $85,000. And his introduction in this movie is so well handled. And the way Toby plays this character, at least for myself, you could tell that he's having the time of his life. And this look that he gives, and they showed it in one of the recent trailers, I could see a whole slew of memes coming out of that alone. He's not in there for very long. Even with those small moments he gets, he makes quite an impression. And I hope that he gets more work after this. I'll see anything that guy's in. But eventually, as the film ends, Manny manages to escape from LA when it turns out that he gave fake money to James McKay. Nellie ends up getting found dead in the streets, but the way they touch on it, it's basically like a little blurb in a newspaper article. Actress found dead in the streets at 34 years old. And they don't really talk about it. They just gloss over it. Manny returns with his now wife and child at the studio that he used to work at in LA, goes to a movie theater, and watching a set of movies that are being shown throughout the day. My grandparents would tell me stories as they were growing up in the 40s that if you go to the movie theater, you could sit there all day and watch a certain type of movie, or an animated short that was playing, or seeing news of the Second World War as it was breaking out in Europe. He gets to see certain movies like Singing in the Rain, which we saw a scene of earlier, which causes him to think back to his first conversation with Nellie and how he wants to be part of something bigger and bringing joy to others. And as he sees everybody's reaction to it, he gets really emotional and finally feels some sense of peace that he was able to accomplish what he wanted. And the film shows us a huge arrangement of clips from certain films like A Trip to the Moon, Avatar, Singing in the Rain, and various other films across the last 100 years of Hollywood. Even with all the zaniness that this film showed, I do like how it tried to convey the message of how powerful film as an art form can be. I don't think it did it perfectly though, but I still do appreciate the attempt. Would I recommend Bablyon to you guys?
That's a little complicated.
No, I understand.
I think if anything, just go see it to experience it. If you're into filmmaking, or if you like to see how films are made, and if you want to see a filmmaker taking a big risk showing certain things, this is the kind of movie for you. But if you want a meaningful story and characterizations, you're not really going to find that here, at least not entirely. If you're a fan of Damien Chazelle, you might like it, or you might not. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle. Any one of the three. I don't know if I'd watch the movie again, maybe a couple of small scenes on YouTube when they eventually creep their way into it, but this is definitely something that we should pay attention to from Chazelle. I'm willing to bet that he still has more to say after this one. I can easily see this film getting nominated for various technical achievements. Editing, sound design, music, directing, well, maybe. Acting and screenwriting, I don't think so, especially in regards to certain content that's presented here. So those are my thoughts on Bablyon. If you guys have seen it, just let me know down below what you thought of it, and what's your favorite Damien Chazelle movie? I'm gonna say that it's probably Whiplash. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely Whiplash for me. Thank you guys once again for watching. Hope you're all having a great Christmas or holiday season, and I'll see you in the next one.